Welcome everyone to
Nerd.
Whoa, what's going on?
Okay, sorry. I thought I was going to do it. I suppose you've been doing it for 10 or more weeks, right?
Yeah, a little while.
No, you do it. You go.
Okay, I'll try again. Welcome everyone to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 176. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_ on Twitter, joined once again by the one and only John White at VJourneyman. Hey John, how's it going?
Doing great. We are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. I'm completely out of practice at doing this. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to career enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Yes. Welcome back, John. Great to have you.
Great to be back. I totally forgot how to do this.
Hey, that's okay. It's just like riding a bike. That's what I hear.
Okay. I haven't ridden a bike in quite a few months, so maybe not a great example, but
you're not there yet. You got okay. You got a little time to go before you need to get the bikes out.
Right.
John, you and your family had a special event, and we want to talk about it today. Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be terrific.
Just want to say congratulations on the first Nerd Journey baby.
The first baby born during Nerd Journey run.
Between you and me, yes.
You actually have a daughter, but I had a daughter that was born just a few weeks back. My wife and I welcomed Keiko Vay White on March 29th. For the Data Nerds, she was just over 7 pounds, 19 inches long, I think. Terrific, healthy baby girl. We're really excited to have her. It's been a little bit overwhelming, but been a really terrific thing. And obviously, come to the topic of the conversation, I took some parental leave, so hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about that process of preparing for it, actually taking it, and then coming back from it.
Well, let's kind of walk through a little bit, starting with your reactions to starting a family.
Oh, yeah. So that, one of the things I realized, like the immediate reaction, it's overwhelming, right? It's amazing to have a little baby, and it's kind of life-changing to hold a baby in your arms and go, oh, I'm responsible for you for, conceivably for the rest of my life. So like that is, again, like a little bit overwhelming and, just kind of changes the tenor of one's life, I suppose. It's been amazing and very gratifying, exhausting, probably not surprising. Highly recommend, just depending on your situation. I realized probably as my wife Sarah and I were talking about marriage that, I had maybe a different level of comfort on starting a family from other people. My tolerance for financial risk was pretty low. So I really felt like, in order to responsibly have a child, I felt the need to be in a specific financial position. I say that, and it's actually pretty unspecific. It wasn't like a certain amount of money in the bank. It wasn't a certain lifestyle that I was able to responsibly maintain. We were able to responsibly maintain. It was just this general we can't, it can't be risky. I'd prefer not to raise a child in poverty, right? But that's something that I kind of worked through. That is definitely something that seeing a family therapist with my wife to kind of work through oh, I guess I am really scared about not being able to support a child, and having that come up and be able to talk openly about it and, have some strategy suggested on working through it. That was pretty helpful. Kind of is based on how I was raised, and then the fact that we don't have immediate family around to be able to kind of lean on for, childcare and things like that. And the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. So even if we had close friends that, we'd be comfortable asking about, and we kind of do, for help, like, it's still like risky, right? Like increases the level of risk during a pandemic, because now you're asking them to like live in a way that you would need them to live in order to match your level of comfort, which is probably not fair. They're already going to do you a favor, so it's just more difficult to ask people for that kind of favor. I don't know. That's kind of my kind of gut reaction about starting a family.
I'm with you, man. That shattering realization, oh, wow. And not only am I responsible for my spouse, which I already was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, both spouses work. Okay, cool. In some cases, one does not. And one person is the breadwinner. And in either case, depending on your financial state, it could be pretty humbling to think about, okay, what would I do if I lost my job tomorrow? And then you introduce this tiny, helpless human who depends on you and your spouse for everything. And that level of realization just becomes even higher. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. And it's just kind of understanding like what it is that is scary about that. It's like, oh, what if the worst case scenario happened? Like, what could I do? If I lost my job tomorrow, like what would be the consequences and what would we have to do? We bought a house a year ago as part of this process, and it was like, well, what if we had to sell the house? Like, how much time would that take? And like, what expenses would that, and it's like, so you just kind of need to have that buffer or war chest or whatever it is. Like, I guess I needed to have it as part of my level of financial comfort. But even the thought process of like, what if you had all those things? Would you still have fear? And the answer for me was yes. And it's just like, oh, okay, so maybe the fear isn't really about that. Maybe it's about just the unknown. And yes, that is it. So is that, can you just control everything? No. Okay. So there's things that you need to do and you don't know all the consequences of those things. Like I've changed jobs, without knowing exactly what was going to happen on the other end. Pretty sure it was a good idea, but didn't know 100%. So there's fear in doing that. So it's the similar type of fear, analogous fear. That's kind of what my process was, I guess.
That makes sense to me. One of the things that people have a little bit of a fear of is that parental leave. We talked to Caitlin Bryan, and I don't have the episode numbers offhand, shame on me, probably about a year ago now. Great episodes on how she was forced to take a parental leave very quickly. Maybe didn't have a lot of time to plan for it. But on that topic, John, since you knew that you and your wife were going to have a baby, can you share some of the things that you two did to plan for that? And maybe points of consideration for people who want to take a parental leave?
So Caitlin Bryant was, that was episodes 111 and 112. I think we recorded it last February, so I'm not sure exactly when we published it. It was after that. But yeah, the things that, we took into consideration, the planning around that, like we used in vitro fertilization. That is like, just something that we needed to do. Like it was part of, like we weren't getting pregnant. We wanted to have kids and, we had started that process of trying and it wasn't working. And over a couple of years, we were like, oh, let's, I work for a company that, thankfully has an IVF benefit that's fairly generous. So we explored what that was, went through the process. So eventually we knew what the timing was going to be. At least, we could, try an embryo transfer knowing like approximately what the date was going to be of giving birth. So that helped. At least there was like one thing that was controlled, right? Parental leave, like, the planning for it, like it starts with like when you're actually looking for a job. If that's something in your mind, it's an awkward thing to ask about. Like, hey, at some, how do I like not work for you and still get paid? It's like, like that's not an easy question to ask, right?
How do I go on a longer vacation, but not really vacation?
you have to like do some like independent investigation of it. And some companies are very proud to publish their policies around that type of thing. So it's pretty easy. And, the companies that are a little bit, more reticent about talking about it, like you just have to be courageous enough to ask the question, because, it's a big deal. Like it's impacted my life. Like, being able to take time off and not all in one shot, to be able to break it up like that, it ends up being like very, very important. So, it might be difficult to ask, like, as you're interviewing. Sometimes you don't even know that it's going to be important for you. Like, it's not even on your horizon, when you're 22, 23 years old and it's your first job. You're not necessarily thinking about, like, hey, I'm definitely going to be a parent in the next, 4 years or something like that. You might not think about that's going to, enter in your life for a decade or more. So you didn't even consider it. When it's on your horizon, like, you need to start doing some investigation. And honestly, it might be a reason to change a job, right? Like, if there's things about your job that are, not that great, and you want to start a family, and you take a look at the policies and you realize that they're pretty sparse and aren't going to support you in what you need, then it might be a major consideration for leaving the organization.
Yeah, it's part of that total compensation package that maybe an aspect of it we don't necessarily think about.
Yeah.
Because if you're finished having kids, then you wouldn't necessarily count that benefit as a perk, but maybe you have elderly parents and there's some kind of care benefit for elderly folks as part of the company that is something else to ask about, depending on the stage of life that you're at. It's just something that popped into my mind.
Yeah, it's very true. Honestly, when we talk about that, like that fertility benefit, having, the option of just as simple as like freezing eggs, harvesting and freezing eggs, if nothing else, like that would have been pretty important. And then the option to go full in vitro like that was like a pretty massive benefit for us. So, if it's something that you need, it's just something that you need to keep in mind. It's a pretty expensive process. And if that's something that you need to go through in order to have a family, like it can, that's like potentially like a $50,000 cost, so it's a pretty massive benefit if the company's footing the bill. Something to keep in mind. I think that, alternately, like finding out if you get that similar type of leave or support, or even if there's any kind of financial support for adoption is another thing to keep in mind. Like that's something my wife asked and I hadn't really thought about, but, I also investigated, because, if the IVF didn't work, or maybe we weren't able to have 2 kids and we wanted 2 kids, like maybe the second child is going to be adopted, right? Like what's that going to look like? So, those are the types of things that eventually you start to ask questions about and poke around and understand, like, what benefits exist. And, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, adoption is also like pretty expensive. So if you can get any kind of support, financial support to go through the process, that can be a pretty big deal. And if you can get parental leave for baby bonding or, whatever, like, family bonding upon adopting a child, like that's also a pretty massive benefit. Things to keep in mind. Things that I hadn't really thought about before, investigating it. Pretty big deal.
Do you know if there are benefits for people who may want to serve as foster families?
Ooh, that is a good question. I don't know.
I haven't heard of any companies offering that, but...
Yeah, that is a great question. Usually, like, when you're a foster parent, like, you are compensated by the foster system. So, maybe that's not as much of a consideration. There's a financial benefit, from the foster system, but, and also it's not maybe specifically not a long-term thing. Right? So I don't know. It's a very different thing. Right? People do that, like, sometimes as a calling, and it's a pretty intense thing to commit to. It'd be interesting to hear from somebody who maybe knows a little bit more about that than I. what that's like.
It would be great to have somebody on the show to share that experience and how that impacted their career.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I would say, like, maybe this is not helpful for much longer, I hope, but, like going through the process of having a child, during a pandemic is kind of like pretty disruptive. There's just a whole bunch of complications around like hospital visits and needing to test before you go in. And, in some cases, like only the mother can go into an appointment. Like they're not going to allow a partner in. As far as like obstetricians, like there's a shortage of OBs and like maternity staff at hospitals. So, going to a hospital, like you might select a hospital, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to support you necessarily. Like, we met people who needed to have a C-section, and it was like, oh, well, like, we don't have the staff for that right now, so we're going to need to reschedule. And it's like, okay, how about next week? Like, nope, we don't have it. There's actually a nurse's strike on, so, we're not going to have the staff. It's like, okay, well, now what do I do? That is really difficult, and I don't, certainly something that, like, as a society, we probably need to address, like the fact that these medical professionals are probably not taken care of the way that they should be, not compensated, not given job security, not, probably overworked. It's a really important part of our society, and you don't necessarily see that until you absolutely need it, and then it's too late. We happen to use a birthing center that was staffed by midwives. It's like a kind of a private thing, so we were kind of out of pocket. I think we got maybe a little bit of insurance coverage for it, but it ended up being like an amazing thing. Shout out to the Pacifica Family Maternity Center in the East Bay. Like, highly recommend them. We'll put a link, I guess, hopefully in the show notes for the very tiny group of people who happen to be listening to this show who need a recommendation in the geographic area that they serve. But, I'd encourage people who are in that situation to investigate maternity centers and midwives. Like, at least the one that we used, like, it wasn't about like, oh, hey, like we never want to go to a hospital, because there's absolutely things that you just have to go to a hospital for. And there are things that they were very strict about. If you're before 36 weeks, don't even, like, you're not going to be giving birth here, right? Like, or if you're after 40 weeks, you're going to be going directly to a hospital. Now, we'll still support you there. Like, we'll send a midwife to help you while you're doing that, but it just won't be in the maternity center. Things like if the baby's in breech position, if you think that you are going to need pain medication, like they don't have an anesthesiologist, so you're not going to be able to get, that kind of pain med. Like as far as they would go, they would had nitrous oxide to kind of take the edge off for the mother, not for the father.
That's too bad. Huh?
I kept on asking, making the joke, and they laughed and never offered it. Obviously, C-sections, like, they just don't do that, right? Not in a maternity center, not by midwives. So we picked one that was like, you could almost walk to a hospital, like, from our maternity center, but, they had like pretty good stats about like what they transferred, but they weren't willing to like be dangerous in order to keep their stats low. It was just like, hey, this is the percentage of people that, have a baby in breech position, or they, in the run-up, they decide, listen, I'm going to want to have pain medication, and so I want the support of the midwives, but I'm not going to go give birth in the maternity center. So it was pretty cool. And then, of course, the parental leave.
You talked about the parental leave and some things that you did to plan for it. Did you actually finish that thought? Because I think you covered some of it earlier. I
mean, I think knowing like approximately what the birth date, date of the birth was going to be, was good. But like, I don't think that's unique to like IVF. Like, you're in the first trimester, second trimester, you are generally pretty sure about, the area of the date of the birth. And so like, that's when you just have to start communicating with your management chain about what you need for support. And mine was pretty amazing. Like, they're so happy for me. And, they modeled that, through managers having kids and, talking about it pretty early and saying, hey, here's the process that we're going to go through and leave and how coverage is going to work and things like that. So I felt pretty comfortable talking to my managers, and they were just over the moon for me, like just so happy. It was a really good feeling to feel supported like that. And then the actual process, like, taking parental leave, like, you need to understand like what the plumbing works like, like what the process and procedures are. Usually it's pretty fault tolerant. So even if like you've been off for a week and you need to go and say, oh, by the way, I started my parental leave a week ago, like it's probably, there's a process for that. But at least mine was like, hey, start like an application, or an alert that this is going to happen. And then when it happens, like you text this number and say, hey, this has started. But so that was a pretty simple process. That's like the actual, like, I don't know, procedures for taking leave, but I think like maybe what's more relevant for like, career stuff is like how you prepare your job and your team and the people around you for you to be gone. And I think that has a lot to do with like the things that we've been talking about over and over again, like one of which is like just maintaining state, right? Like having documents for you to like know what the context is for like all of, like, at least for me, is like accounts and projects and like next steps in a shared place where, people don't have to like ask me for permission. It's in like an area that like they can just all access. That was pretty important. Having that all set up ahead of time, having it all be like something that like everybody knew about and how to access that stuff, and then not have it be like a hard cutover. Like I've walked people through like those documents ahead of time. They know where they are. I'm keeping them up to date. It's for me as much as it is for them, right? I don't know what could actually happen, if that didn't happen, if you don't maintain state and have people be able to kind of like walk into all the work that you're doing, have like a document that's, just really up to date, that like people can just go, oh, this is what John's been doing. Like, this is, everything that I need to know about, like all John's projects and things like that. So that was pretty important.
Otherwise you're going to get super stressed out.
Yeah.
When D-Day hits.
Don't know. Yeah, exactly. If nobody knows what you're doing, then you know that stuff is falling through the cracks when you leave. And then that means that your attention is split. In the back of your mind, stuff is being missed and not being handled and degrading. And it's horrible. So like, as much as possible, like, don't do that. It can be not perfect, right? If it's like 90% there, and then, the baby comes and you hop on a call at some point and give somebody like a download and they take notes for the last 10%, then that's as good as you can hope for, probably, right? Because it is quite a bit of overhead to like do a download at the end of every single day, on every single task. It's probably the best thing to do, but maybe you're not doing that. Maybe you're not being perfect about that. So, I had the ability to like have somebody like cover me for the last like couple weeks and shadow to see what I was doing. And that worked great. So it was more of a soft cutover than a hard cutover. That was terrific. There's the question of like, how does that person, or does that person like understand all the nuances? And that's impossible, right? Because usually like you write documentation for yourself and for other people that you plan on like providing color for commentary for, right? Not here's like a brain dump and somebody can read a document and go, oh, I guess I know everything I need to know. I have no questions. That's probably pretty impossible. I guess, during the leave, like, do they need to contact you about something? And at least for me, like, my messaging was, I'm available, and I'm mostly available on a non-emergency basis, because how are you going to get in touch with me on an emergency basis? Like, text me. I might not be looking at my text messages. Calling me, I might have my phone off. And then where are you? Right? So if you have questions about what's going on, ask them early before it's an emergency. And, to the point where I have a couple days to like notice that you've asked a question and formulate a response and have time to actually respond. Right. And so that was my messaging. Like, ask me early, ask often even, but just ask early. And that seemed to work pretty well. Hey, I need access to a document that, you might have overlooked. Hey, was there any additional detail on this project? There wasn't a project document linked in the overall document. Oh, okay. Maybe I forgot, or maybe there isn't one, or whatever. But like, there's just that like two-way conversation. And it's much easier to have when it's not an emergency.
So I have to ask, John,
Mm-hmm.
did your checking for non-emergency messages line up with the deep work philosophy of setting a specific time to check those? Was that just a continuation of existing processes, adoption of a new one, so that you wouldn't be constantly checking?
So it wasn't. I didn't constantly check. Here's how it aligned and how it didn't align. It aligned in that I felt free to completely walk away. So I put it down completely. How it didn't align, I didn't schedule time to check in, right? Because I didn't know exactly how that would work. Who knows, like, specific time of day, every fourth day, every third day, every second day, am I going to have time to do that? So I just promised myself that in those times when I felt free, that I would check in and, scan my email for like, I basically set up some like searches ahead of time for like, here's like emails from my immediate manager, from my director, and from my colleagues, where I was the one like specifically being emailed, like I was in the to, and not in the carbon copy or blind carbon copy, so I had a folder that would like, I could just scan through that. And then in chats, like those are the two things that I checked. Was I specifically mentioned in a chat? And that like bubbles up via email. So, I let people know like that's how I was going to be checking. And so it was pretty easy for me to check. Just kind of run through and in 10 or 15 minutes know that I could clear out, any worries. And then, that was it. Like I didn't worry about it other than that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. You just kind of have like, that process of like walking away, you have to have faith in the process of preparation. For me, that process of like having, overall documents where I was maintaining state for myself as much as for anybody else, or for collaborating with other people who are just kind of, not stateful on a specific project or on a specific account, for them to be able to come in, like see, read up, see context, have like massive, the main links out to other important supporting documents, like making all that stuff up and running and available and up to date, like that was just massively helpful for me because I just turned that into, this is what I'm handing over to everybody when I'm gone. And that was essentially, trivial to, I didn't make any changes. All I did was like try to update that more often and make sure that it was complete.
I love the fact that you were able to work in stateful and stateless in this conversation. Like that just made me smile.
Yeah. Oh, there's a thing that you have to do that I had to do, and that is let go of ego. Like the idea that like I need to be the one who's doing this process. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense to you.
Oh, it makes sense. Like this is what I've been doing. Like that's my thing. I should do this. You almost feel it's the ownership feeling. Mm-hmm. I own this. I need to carry it forward. I've done all this work so far. But you're right, man. It's hard. Even when you go on vacation, if you have access to your email, it's hard to not.
Yeah. I think what I wanted, like the shift that I had to make was pride in the process that I followed up until this point, right? That I've laid such like good groundwork that anybody could walk in and keep it going for a certain period of time, right? Not just anybody, of course. It's like, it has to be like somebody who, is involved in the process, but
someone approved by John White.
Somebody like, that works at the company, that knows how to do the job, like, that I've oriented and they can just maintain it. That is what I had to take pride in. Like, not like, oh, I have to be the one with my finger in every step of the pie in order for it to be fully baked and proper. It's like that. Like if you make yourself like a point of failure in the process, like that's not actually a good thing. Like, that's a bad thing. So, you can say like, oh, maybe I would have done it a little bit better, or I would have done it a little bit differently, but it still gets done without me. If you set it up for it to be impossible to be done without you, you should not take pride in that. Yeah.
And if you can remove yourself a little bit at a time so that it's not such a pull the Band-Aid off, maybe that helps, but it's hard in any situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but like for me and my job, as a pre-sales technical contact, I'm already not responsible for everything, right? I have to bring in specialists to work on specific work streams. So it's already not me that's doing everything. Like I take pride in facilitating that and maybe making sure that that process gets driven forward, right? Hey, you had this meeting. Was there an output? Is there a follow-up meeting? Like, when is it scheduled? Making sure that all those types of bases are covered, and what is the output? What are the next steps? What are the things that need to happen for that next step? Can you take responsibility for the first 5, and I'll do these 2, right? Like, making sure that all happens. But I don't have the expertise to actually like go in and do some of those tasks, right? It's like, that's why we have a specialist doing it. So, I'm already there, right? It's already not me doing, I'm already working with a team. So like, you have to, at least I should talk about me. Like, I had to realize that was the case and incorporate that into like the part of the pride that I'm taking. Like, I can be a great orchestrator. Can I be a good enough orchestrator of this process that I can actually, set up, things far enough advanced with enough detail that I can have a colleague step in and take over orchestration? That's how good my orchestration is. Yes. And that's the pride and ego that I take, that I've done it so well that I don't even need to be there. Somebody else can take the reins, and, there's enough background, there's enough context for anybody else to be able to pick up and work on it. Again, maybe not the way that I would do it, but the way that they would do it. And it's always good to have like more than one person looking at something. Maybe they're going to find things that I overlooked. That's great.
Or maybe they'll do it better, right?
That's great too. If I can take pride in the setup and have a colleague who's better at, execution at some parts, like, I'm going to keep that in mind, because I might ask them to come in and do that every time, right?
Yeah, you're setting up the slam junk, right?
Yeah. And then maybe, they ask me to come in and help with the setup on all their accounts, right? I have, maybe it's perverse, but I have a perverse amount of pride when somebody asks me for an account like transfer meeting, and they say, like, this account has gone from me to them. And I sit down with them and I say, here's all my account like overview document. Here is my running meeting notes with all the like, and they just look at it and go, oh, wow. Almost like, oh, geez, like, we don't do this with our accounts. Like, why aren't we? That I have a lot of pride in that I can, transfer that. Here's all my ideas. It's all documented. Here's all the steps that I think, need to happen to investigate some of these, like, brainstorm ideas, or the fact that I need to investigate what the next steps are to, do some of these other things. Like, maybe that's just my thing.
That's awesome.
It's what I wish I had, from somebody else when they're handing an account over to me.
It's just an extension of the golden rule: do unto others, as you would want someone to do for you.
And I think, we've had conversations in the past about having a brand within an organization, and that is, part of what I want my brand to be. It's like somebody looks at, all my notes and context and, overview documents for an account that I'm covering, and they go, oh, I have an 80% understanding of what's going on with this account. John has like really explained everything to me, in a way that is logical, that makes sense. In any given account that John is covering, like, I can get to 80% of what he's thinking or more in 20 minutes of reading.
Nice.
That was a big deal for me. That was a real point of pride. Like, that's where I had to transfer my ego, right? Not like I need to be the one that's doing it all. But, pride in being able to hand it off. So I guess maybe because I had done those handoffs before to, this account is moving to the East Coast because they were acquired or their headquarters, moved. And, I'd done all those things before, that helped prepare me for doing these things, for my accounts that were staying, with the same account rep. It was just I was the one who was, taking time off.
Well, what if we extend that idea of ego, John? How does it play into the return? So you let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Do you pick it back up, or is it just lighter?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things to take into account there, right? Like when you're leaving on parental leave, like, I'm not a lawyer, but like my understanding is like they're not guaranteeing you that you're going to walk into the same job. They're guaranteeing you that you're going to walk into a job at that seniority level, like with a similar title and similar responsibilities. So I theoretically could have been moved to a completely different team, covering a different, set of accounts, with similar seniority. So, that was just, that's part of it. But that could have happened without going on parental leave. So, it's just, it's just part of the job, right? So coming back, it was just like, hey, I know that I'm going to have to ease back into it, right? Because I've been out of touch and I don't have all the context and everything. So at least for my plan was, I was like, with the account rep, the sales rep who's covering the accounts, and the person who was covering the technical side of those things, they had multiple meetings a week just to talk about, planning and coordination. So I said, hey, I'm going to start joining those meetings even before I'm back. So I sat in on some of those meetings and I said, here's my rule. I'm going to sit in, I'll even give feedback, but I'm not going to take any action items because like I'm off. So,
right. So
that's what I did, and then I broke my rule and they're like, hey, can you sit in on this quarterly business review? And I was like, yeah. I mean, that's probably something I can do without taking action items there. So,
well, I like the intent of maintaining the boundary.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's
and
easy to get sucked into
right?
it,
Yeah. And that's, it was okay for me to say no, right? It was just like, oh, it's going to be a 45-minute meeting, maybe shorter. I'm going to be taking some notes, offering my perspective, letting them know that I've been out on leave for a while, so I might have ideas that are out of date. And I always feel free to say, ooh, I don't know the answer to that, and I'll find out. That was kind of my strategy for like transitioning back in. And I had to like, again, like as part of that ego go, well, like maybe I'm not even going to be the primary, person covering these accounts anymore. Maybe my team is going to have changed in composition or the way that they do things. So, maybe the person who took over is going to stay in charge and I'm just going to like back them up and I'm going to go transition to doing other things, right? Like that's a total possibility, and that should be fine, right? Should be fine.
What about motivation? I mean, new dad,
Mm-hmm.
You disconnect like that. I'm sure you start to enjoy the time, and maybe some people would even dread coming back. Like, oh, I gotta go back to work. It's the worst. Well, how do you get remotivated to, okay, time to get back in the groove? Or maybe, you needed to break up the schedule a little.
Yeah, so there's two parts to that. Like one is, have I done enough at home, right, to help with my child and my family? So, one of the important things to do is to like gauge, like, did you take enough time off? Like I had a fairly generous amount of time that I could take off, and I was able to, I'm able to do it in like multiple shots. So, I ended up scheduling 8 weeks, letting them know that I was going to actually take 10, about a week ahead of time. Week 7, I was like, ooh, I'm not going to come back on week 8. I'm probably going to come back on week 10 and, extending it there. And that was just, necessary because of where my daughter was. Like, my daughter and my wife like needed me more, like, than I would be able to give, like, coming back, like if I was working full time. That was good. And then knowing that my wife and I were aligned with the amount of support that I would be able to give her, while I was working, If I'm not scheduled, yeah, I'll be able to take a 30-minute break. And, because I'm working from home, I can spell you for 30 minutes. Or I can put, an hour lunch on my schedule and schedule, spell you for an hour during then. Like those types of things, like, again, because I have the freedom to work from home are, what we needed in order for that to feel comfortable. And then once I felt comfortable, then I welcomed the intellectual stimulation. Because I really enjoy what it is that I do for work. It's not just a job. It's something that incorporates a lot of intellectual stimulation, problem solving, picking up multiple problems with different contexts and then putting them down, making recommendations and following up and following through. And that's all, fascinating stuff for me, the problem solving part of it. It was difficult to walk away but I was walking into, when I was on parental leave, there's a whole different set of problems that I was solving that had to do with like being a parent, for the first time. So that was cool. And then if I had the financial, flexibility to be able to just never work again and, still maintain my lifestyle, would I have done that? I almost think, not, because, the intellectual side of it, is really interesting. I really enjoy working with the customers, the types of customers that I'm working with. I really enjoy working with my colleagues. We brainstorm, we, collaborate. It's a really like stimulating environment. It's really cool to be around. I can feel like it pushes me to keep on growing. It wasn't really difficult to get motivated to come back. I really enjoy doing that type of work. So, like that is a luxury, I guess, that I have. Like if I was returning to a coal mine, maybe it would be different. Oh, it's super dangerous and you might get black lung and it's, physically demanding and, breaks down your body. Like none of those things are, concerns for me, right? It's almost all like stimulation and growth. So the motivation was there.
I would love to hear from anybody out there who's taken a leave of any kind that was this, whether it was parental leave, bereavement leave, military leave, and you actually realized that you were completely burned out in your job. But it sounds like you were not.
Well, I had a situation like that working for VMware. I lost my dad like right before VMworld. I think this was 2019. It's 3 years ago. Yeah, I guess it was 2019. And that, I think had a big part in me, like, leaving, right? It wasn't 100% of everything. Walking away from it and taking some time off and going, like, it's a company I love working for, but I feel like I am at that breaking point. That did happen. Maybe that was part of it was my fault for letting it happen. I probably needed to take more time off. I probably shouldn't have gone and done my VMworld presentation and, felt the need to do that. If I was going to go back and do that, I should have taken time off after that for that grieving. But, that's just my situation, right? And that's not necessarily what anybody else is going to go through. So
certainly,
but it can definitely, time away can make you examine what it is that you're going back to, right? And that is, one of those things that happens. You go like, do I want to go back? If I don't want to go back, what is it that's causing me to not want to go back? And it's rarely black and white, right? There can be like, oh, there's things that I don't welcome going back to is what it's probably mostly going to be, right? If I didn't go back, this is what I wouldn't miss. If I didn't go back, this is what I would miss.
Right. Like that guy you podcast with, you probably wouldn't miss him.
Couldn't get rid of you.
You tried, but just kept coming back.
No, if that was an issue, I wouldn't have come back, right?
Right. Fair point.
Yeah, but I would be interested in hearing stories from other people, and maybe that's something that we'll be asking, moving forward. Hey, have you ever had, a time of leave and, take leave, and was that a good time to examine, like, a job transition to say, oh, there's things about this that I'm not looking forward to going back to, and, how did that work? Because sometimes it's just, oh, hey, there's these things that I'm not relishing coming back to. And then you just go talk to your management chain about that, and then they help you change those things.
Yep.
And that's a legitimate response too.
Makes sense to me.
At any rate.
Any other lessons learned in the transition back, moving forward, things you might want to do differently before we get close to the end?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, for me, is something that I'm still facing is like, how good did my systems work, right? Were my systems adopted by the people that I worked with? So I had all these notes. I maintained state. Did they maintain those notes? Did they continue to update them for me to come back to be able to like walk into those same account overview documents for those running meeting notes and be able to pick back up and see how things had progressed? If not, why not? Was it too difficult to do? Did it just not fit their style? Was it not important to them? Why not? And if they did it, but it is difficult for me to transition back in, like, why was that? Were there things that, I didn't anticipate needing, but I did need? What gaps existed in the system? Like, it's a really good way to kind of test that. Those are the kinds of things that I would say that transition back is a really good way to stress test that, account notes process, meeting notes process, maintaining state.
Maintaining state. Do you foresee any changes to your schedule as a result of now being a parent?
Yeah, I think I protected things a little bit more. Like, I need a little bit more structure. I'm doing breakfasts for my wife while she's like, feeding our daughter in the morning. So I'm more structured about that. So when I'm coming on, might be a little bit more structured. And, do I have the freedom to like take a 7 a.m. meeting anymore? Like, maybe not, because at least for a certain period of time, like, I really need to be covering family obligations during that time. Can I work around it? Like, probably, with enough notice to be able to go, okay, I'm going to get up and do that, at 6:30 and, before I'm needed. It's just not on an emergency basis. Same thing for lunchtime. It's like, hey, my wife needs a break so she can handle like, things that she needs to do away from our daughter. Sometimes it's as simple as taking a shower, it's like somebody needs to watch the baby. Simple stuff like that to be able to give her a break. I just need to put that in my schedule, and, my colleagues need to understand like why and when that's happening. So as long as they see it in my calendar and, understand, then it works.
You are a calendar wizard, John White.
Well, it's tough to send a calendar invite to somebody like in the same organization when their calendar's blocked for that time, right? It's
exactly.
Like, oh, this person is not available. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Make sure to put it in.
Can you meet at 5:30 a.m. instead of 7, John?
Well, that's outside of my working hours. It's already in my calendar.
My working hours are actually marked and show up on my calendar. So, yeah, I love it.
Ask away for that 5:30 a.m. meeting. Ask away.
I love it. Well, John, I think that's it for the segment and everything we needed to discuss. Anything else pop into your mind while we talked?
I think that, people just need to think about these things ahead of time. When it's on the horizon, leave it until you need to do all the research all at once. Like, if you're thinking about becoming a parent, start investigating things, and then when it becomes a little bit more serious, investigate a little bit more seriously, and then when it's really serious, then you do the final polishing on all your plans. That's the best advice that I can give.
It sounds like you're saying research early and research often.
That is what I'm saying. You just don't need to do like all the detailed research, like when it's like just a glimmer in the back of your mind. You can just, as unserious as it is, it's like, oh, it's like a 3% potential in the next 3 years. Great. Well, then you only need to know 3%, right? It's like, is there a policy? Yes, there is. Is it good enough for me? It probably is. Like, that's what you need to know. Like, hey, when I do some more research, what are the links to our internal resources that I would need to save? Copy paste all into a document for you to discover later. I think that's it for me, but I do want to provide a reminder that we'd like people to subscribe and give us a positive review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening. We want to know if we're being helpful. And we're always, of course, looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
All right. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_. For John White at VJourneyman. Signing off.
Adios.